Well, welcome back, church family. My name is Ben, and I have the honor of serving here as the lead pastor at Downtown Community Church, and I am once again with my incredible, irresistible, not irreligious, maybe incandescent, I don't know if that works or not, illustrious co-host, the one and only Grace Markwell.
That's ridiculous. Hey everyone, my name is Grace, and we are excited to be back with all of you. We are in Unit 5 today, and last time we left off with Moses, and Moses being given the law by God and kind of coming into this conditional covenant of the Israelites being blessed if they obeyed the law and not being blessed if they didn't obey the law. And so today we're jumping in with David, which is a long time after Moses.
Yeah, about to say there's some Bible in between Moses and David. So why don't you take a swing at connecting all those dots?
I will do my best. So basically, after Moses received the law, like we said last time, they were on their way to the promised land whenever they were stopped by God at Mount Sinai to get the law. But they didn't end up in the promised land for another 40 years because, surprise or not, they were sinful. And so they wandered around the desert for 40 years. They're finally allowed to enter the promised land, but it's not even Moses that gets to take them because he had been sinful. God raises up his successor named Joshua, and he leads the people into the promised land, and he leads them to victory over the people that are living there. And so they get there. We think everything's going to be good. They're finally in their spot, but it's not. The Israelites enter into this cycle of rebellion, and it's basically they would sin, they would disobey God, and so those blessings would not be there. God would then discipline them through the force of another nation. Another people would come in and kind of battle them, and they would realize they had messed up, so they would repent, come back to God, and then once they had repented, God would then deliver them from this other nation that had kind of conquered them, had gone into battle with them through a leader called a judge. And so we have this period of judges that lasts for over 400 years. It was kind of the leader of Israel at that time.
And I think what's important at that point is that the judges, the context, the hierarchy, the structure of the nation was what's called a theocracy, right? So God was to be God, and there wasn't supposed to be a king, but the nation looked around and said, man, everybody else has a king, and we want a king just like everybody else because it seems like it works better than what we're currently doing. And God kept saying, it's not going to go well, it's not going to go well, it's not going to go well. So anyways, cool.
And so they're demanding this king, and God was like, I'm your king, but he finally gives them a king. He gives them what they're asking for. And so they get this first king named Saul, and Saul ruled for a while, but he did evil in the sight of the Lord. That's language that's used time and time again. These kings did evil in the sight of the Lord. But during Saul's reign, the next king was appointed. He was actually anointed to be the next king. And it was this young shepherd boy named David. He was a kid while he was anointed to be the next king. He was the least likely candidate. Whenever they went to fetch him, he was actually out tending to the sheep. So not this victorious military king that they wanted, but he was a man after God's own heart is how the Bible described him. And so God was going to use him.
Which is crazy because, right, when prophet goes to anoint the king, his dad, Jesse, he doesn't even, he brings his other sons and completely leads David out. Like, you think you've got some issues? Like, David was with the sheep, and dad's like, let's not even bring my dude in from the field.
Totally
right?
Forgotten.
It's wild. So what you're going to read is in 2 Samuel 7. So David has this crazy ascension into becoming the king, and David sees God, like, I love you, and I want you to have a temple just like everybody else. I want you to have a throne. I want people to see this edifice that we build, and everybody's going to know you are God, right? God basically says, David, I love you, but I don't want you to do that. I want your son to build that. But in that, he actually kind of initiates or kind of reminds of the covenant of Abraham, telling that he would give people their land and protection from their enemies, all that kind of stuff. But he also promises David that his son will be the one to build his house, Solomon. And so David, who had been asking if he could do this whole thing, God was actually, in a cool way, God goes beyond just saying you can build this and said, David, I'm actually going to establish your throne forever, right? Which was just kind of this wild, wait, David's going to have a throne forever? Like, how does that even work? Obviously, that was pushing towards saying, from the lineage of David would come Jesus, the Messiah, who sits enthroned forever.
Yeah, and that was a huge deal because their culture was all about who came from their lineage, like who would receive their inheritance, who their heirs would be. That was the biggest deal. And so for God to make this promise was a huge deal, but David probably didn't know just how big of a deal it would be.
Right. He's like, nope. God's like, you don't get it yet.
Yeah, you don't get it. And so we get to see kind of more of what God meant by that as we go on to read in Isaiah on day 2 of this unit. And this is kind of the classic Christmas passage, but it works here really well. It's actually God promising a coming day where the throne of David, yes, will be established forever, but this king that will come through the throne of David, he will be this great king, and yes, will be victorious, but he also promises that his peace will never end, which had to be just such a glimmer of hope to the people who were receiving this prophecy, because they were going through anything but peace at that moment.
It was constant.
Yeah. And so they had this king to look forward to. And then the next day we're going to read Hebrews 1. And so we're back in Hebrews, and here we see that Jesus was the fulfillment of this king who would reign forever, but he was not just this ordinary king. It wasn't just the king that they were expecting. Yes, he will reign forever in that sense, but he's also greater than all the other kings, greater than all the angels, all the saints, all the people that we've read about. Jesus is greater than them, and the writer of Hebrews talks about that. He was their creation. He is the radiance of God's glory, and it says he's the exact representation of God's being. And so we just get this like magnification of Jesus, showing that, David's expectations blown out of the water by this king that would reign forever.
That's awesome. And last thing with this is, based on this promise, you can see where in Jesus' day people missed this.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
They thought, he's going to establish Israel. We're going to be prominent. We're going to be kings forever. There's going to be peace, but Rome's in charge. But Jesus, you're dying. Why is that happening, right? And so part of Hebrews is explaining, hey, this is what this promise meant. This is how Jesus actually fulfilled this. Explaining kind of the theology behind the patriarch, the prophet, the person of Jesus. Now let me connect all these dots together.
Yeah,
Hebrews.
that's really good.
All right. Well, we love you guys. Excited for next week where we're going to jump in. Actually, heads up, next week's going to be a little bit different, so get ready.